I'm Barbara Taylor, and I'm the author of The Last Asylum, which is a memoir of my years of mental illness back in the 1980s. It was published in the UK in last year and in Canada last August. I had a model for my book in some ways, for the structure, although I suspect he would be surprised to hear it, which was Michael Ondaatje's wonderful memoir, Running in the Family, which is a sort of bricolage of many elements in his early life that he draws together to kind of culminate in a larger story. And I wanted to take the reader back to what I felt was I suppose, the sort of genesis of my psychological difficulties in my early family life, in the complexities of my early family life, growing up in Saskatoon, and also, I suppose, in an odd way, as a sort of tribute to my parents, who certainly did their very best by me in a difficult family history. So the book begins with my growing up years, with the political story. My parents were very political people. Saskatchewan, where I grew up, has a very rich political history, and I wanted to indicate some of that and my parents' involvement in that, and how important that was to me, because I also became a very politically involved person. And then I wanted to take the reader over to London, where I call myself a sort of accidental immigrant to London. I didn't really plan to move to London when I left Canada, but I became very ill when I was in London in my late 20s and went into treatment. And in a sense, that decided my fate. Because I was in psychoanalysis for many years in London, and I had intervals, 4 years, in psychiatric institutions before recovering and getting a job and starting to live something more like an ordinary life. I'm a historian, so when I decided to write this book, or that is when I thought I would tell my story, I knew I always wanted it to be part of the much bigger story of the changes that I experienced in the psychiatric system while I was a patient for nearly 4 years, from the late 80s to the early 90s. And these were periods of enormous change in mental health services as the mental hospitals closed and were replaced by the so-called community care system. I experienced those changes directly, and as a historian, I wanted to look back to see how the decision to make those changes, how it were made, and in particular, I wanted to tell the story of the asylum. The story of the asylums is a very, very mixed story, as is my story. I was very, very unwell. I believe very much that madness is a condition. There are many different kinds of ways of being mad. Most people are not mad all the time. Most people, so-called normal people, are mad now and then. But I believe that there is tremendous psychological suffering that many people go through, and I didn't want in any way to fudge that story. I wanted to tell the truth as best I could about that. And any point when I was writing my book, when I thought to myself, I can't tell that, I then began to realize that if I didn't tell that, the story started to fall apart. And in a sense, it began to sort of write itself. And it helped a lot that I'm a historian, because I also was able to create a certain distance between the writing self and the mad self that I was writing about. When I take the reader into the asylum system, I want them to understand that it was not all terrible, that there are many elements of asylum care and the asylum experience which proved enormously important to me. I'm not sure I would be here today without that. The sustained care, the fact that I had a sense of refuge from my own feelings, from my own self-destructiveness. I was most frightened of myself at that time, and being held by what some people call a stone mother in the asylum was a really saving experience for me. The asylums were born in the early 19th century on a tide of optimism about what institutions could do for people, and enormous goodwill toward their inmates, and very innovative forms of therapy. Those great reforms were lost in the course of the 19th century, and with them died a great deal of the optimism about what institutions can do for people. So these days, we regard institutions almost entirely negatively. We think people need to be out there in the community, independent, self-reliant. You know, most of us at some point in our lives need institutions, even if it's, I now work in a university. I need my university for a sense of belonging and so on. So the demise of these institutions took with them many very positive elements. One that I talk about quite a lot in my book are friendships among the patients themselves, which is an aspect of asylum life on which almost nothing has been written at all. And sadly, many of those stories are now lost to us, of course. I'm Barbara Taylor. I'm the author of The Last Asylum, which is the story of my years of mental illness back in the 1980s, and the story of my long and painful road to recovery.